All right, we're back. We are game 1014 in the winter 2017 semester, and we are week 6, part 1 of our broadcast, and we're talking about game production 2 again. We're going into another part of our we're going to another part of the book. We've been talking last week about more of the production cycle. This week we're talking about making builds, and as well as the testing cycle. So part of this section for builds is the build process, build notes, and preventing piracy. We've already talked about part of this. We started that last week. I don't know if you guys remember, but we're going to talk more about this now. All right, so when we make builds, and last week we talked about meeting regularly and what happens when your project goes off kilter, right? So something didn't happen, people didn't show up or whatever, or they're not delivering, and then things go off the rails, and then you kind of bring it back. How to have productive meetings and all that kind of stuff, and all those kind of things can affect the build, right? So one of the things I asked you guys last week is, did you do anything? I said, hey, what were you productive? And I asked you to show me your build. Most of the teams, I have to say, had something to show me. So I mean, that means 2 out of 4. If I was going to say most, half the teams had something to show me. One of the teams I was very happy, to kind of see the progress that I was shown was really, really good, which is a good thing. And I think one of the successes that I've seen from that one team, I'm not going to say who it is consistency. I see consistent behavior, consistent attendance, and a consistent delivery and improvement on their product, which is something that's good. So builds is something that's going to start happening from now on a regular basis. And if it hasn't started happening already, we're at week 6, then it's not going to happen anytime in the future any better than it's happening now, most likely, which means you're probably going to have to rush to get your final product out if you haven't built up a process by now, right? And just hands, just want to know who's not confident? I'll put it out there. Who is not confident that you're not going to be ready for alpha release? Is there anyone not confident? I'm just asking that question. I got to ask, right? I know that you're like, what is he asking that question for? Because some people may not be confident. Is there someone not confident, right? That's good. I'm glad to see that everybody's confident. We'll come around and see how you're really confident after I talk to you. So part of it is this idea of producing these builds on a regular basis. It's usually done more and more as you build towards alpha. So a lot of the times we have to have this idea of we're talking about project management now when we come down to it. Last week we talked about the triple constraint triangle. It was in a different way. We talked about quality and time, resource management, all those kind of fine things. And this week we're talking about another aspect of project management, which is the build process and the build schedule. So from the people that are in this class, does anyone not have by now a build schedule? I'm hoping that you guys have a build schedule, right? But guys, I'm so sorry. I know I want to entertain you guys, and I want to talk with you guys too, but let me get through this thing, and after we do this, you can go back to working with your teams. Okay. So build schedule. We're talking about build schedule and the build process. So when we talk about compiling a milestone build, right? Something that we've been building up over the time. Part of it is the tools we've been giving you. We've given you GitHub as one of the tools, right? GitHub as one of the tools. Sorry, I gotta stop again because of this chatter that I'm hearing. So what we want to try and do is track the build. Part of the build process is how we track everything, right? And hopefully by now, the people that are the engineering leads are tracking each of the builds that you're producing. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask I'm gonna get a little bit of a litmus test here. How many commits? Do you guys know how many commits you have on your current build? James, how many commits do you have on your current build? 2. Again, so that, well, like I said, so we could talk afterwards, but 2 is not a good number. Okay, 2 means you're not using GitHub, right? And how about you? How many commits do you have on your build? 38 on the master build. Okay.
So we have about 4 plus the other ones coming in. That's about 6, and that's all. And that is.
I'm talking about commits on master. 6 commits.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have more in our branch.
All right. And what about in the group in the back?
We have 29 in our master.
29. Right. That's what I'm used to seeing. 29, 38, something like that. Having this few builds means either you're not using GitHub enough, right, or not using it at all, right? And that's a negative. I'm sorry for people who think it's okay. It's not okay, right? It's not okay to have that other process. If you're sharing your build on Google Drive, or if you're sharing it on some other sharing service or whatever it is, if it's not something that's involved with version control, it's not industry standard in any way. It's not best practices. It can be done. I'm not saying it's not like flowing for you or you're not producing. It's not about that. It's about sharing the information. Remember the 3 things I talked about for GitHub is the ability for you to collaborate with other people and share your code base, version control to make sure that from a bug tracking perspective, you can track bugs and nail them down and revert when you need to. And the other thing that you want to do with GitHub is you want to use it as a backup just in case your main systems that you're using to house your build burn down or get lost or something goes wrong or hard drive breaks or something, right? It's possible. So it should be part of your build process and part of how you develop your milestone. So we're going to talk about things like your alpha build, your alpha release, and your demo build. Who's ready for some kind of, or close to, even though the alpha is a couple weeks away or a few weeks away, who's almost ready with the alpha? Who would say they're almost ready? That's good. That's excellent, right? And that's what and I know that's where you're at. I'm not saying by any means that you're not producing. It's just, we have to talk about best practice. So you guys are kind of okay. You guys in the back, are you close to having your alpha?
We were having a lot of trouble with the collision.
Okay. Are you?
Luckily, we were able to figure it out today itself. So I think it's going to be easier from now on.
So you solved your problem with collisions?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about Fernando and your team there?
Oh, we recently just did work and about our main.
But as you're going, are you closer to getting to your alpha? Okay, because that's going to be something that we're going to be talking about soon. One of the things they talk about a lot is a demo build, and usually marketing. They always talk about marketing in a larger company. They ask you for a demo build, and sometimes the demo build is full of bugs, and that's okay, right? Because marketing is expecting to see kind of get a gist when it comes to developing or marketing or kind of sharing the progress on your game, especially from an investor perspective. When you're getting investors for your game, that kind of thing, they want to market it, they want to talk about it, they want to give an excitement around what your game is about. And they ask you for a demo build, right? So a demo build is kind of like an alpha, in the alpha stage, in that range. And what we do is we take that, and it has to be somewhat more than just playable. All the piece parts, more or less, for the beginning, for a level or so, are done, right? With still some features that are not completed or not deployed. Yeah.
Do they expect to be polished?
No, they don't. But they expect you to have some kind of exciting pieces, like for example.
Doesn't expect to see polished ads.
No, it can't. Publisher is different. I'm talking about from a marketing perspective. They want to start talking about your game. They're going to bring your game to a show or something. They want to talk about that. There's got to be some kind of playability in the game. There should be all the interfaces. So when a person who's never seen the game sees it, they know what the game is about, right? That kind of thing.
I expect if you're going to show it to people, you want to show like polished.
You can't. You can't. Sometimes it gets burned down, right? The whole project stops, right? Especially if you haven't made enough progress, right? So so when we look at stuff, we don't do exactly a polished build when it comes to marketing. A demo build is something like where you have your first demos. It's just coming out of alpha. It's going into beta. You kind of lock down some of your code. Your feature sets or your feature things that you haven't put in are not completely going to stop you from building. It's somewhat playable, but it's not anywhere near completion. Okay. Has anyone been involved in early release work? Any kind of, you got the early release. You can download an early release from Xbox or whatever. Playing the game. Anyone play this? What do those look like? Now that's not a demo build, but what does that look like when you actually play these games? Right. So and that's beyond a demo. right? That is like a distributed release where they're actually getting you guys to do some of their testing, right? They're giving you some feedback. They're going to give you to say, well, how is this game playing out? Is it working? Is it not working? And they usually have to be on the kind of on a short list of people that can look at a game, and they don't just sometimes they don't just give it to anybody. So sometimes what happens is they might create different builds. One of the builds we talked about is the demo build. Sometimes they might ask you for doing things with multiplayer. Let's say, for example, you have multiple modes of play. And I guess one of my favorite things is having a game where you can play the game in different modes. Like, for example, you might have a story mode, right? And you might have just a competitive play mode. I know the game I'm thinking of at the top of my head is, if I think about a game that's just competitive mode, it would be Overwatch. There is no story mode, right? And if I'm just thinking about a game that only has story mode, something like a Skyrim, or maybe I'm thinking Skyrim, or even Fallout, something recent, or even Battlefield to some degree. And then there's a game that has a lot of different kinds of modes, and it may not be the greatest game, but Star Wars, Battlefront is a game like that, where you have training mode. There's a competitive mode. There's a couch, side-by-side couch, competitive mode, couch co-op. There's no story mode though. That's the one thing it doesn't have. It doesn't have that piece, right? You can't play a story with Star Wars Battlefront right now, but they have different modes. And sometimes what they ask you to do is, with marketing, they might ask you to produce another demo for a different mode, right? For example, this multiplayer test idea. If you have a game that allows multiplayer or competitive play. We want to track our builds. This is definitely how we're building things out, and we use different types of tools for this. Sometimes as simple as something like an Excel sheet, right, where we track how we're going, and usually the build status or we kind of share how far we've gone with our builds with others in meetings, especially in our weekly meetings. We talked about last week about having weekly meetings in terms of how we're progressing. Well, we kind of share the status of our build. How's it going? And you guys should be doing that in kind of a shortened fashion, even though we may not be as formal in the way we meet, right? You should be meeting with your team members and saying, okay, here's where we're at, right? And I recommend, like I said, having a stand-up meeting, so that way you're not wasting your time or being distracted by doing other things. Because the biggest problems with meetings outside of the classroom is, even inside the classroom, is I'm looking at my phone, I'm playing a game. That's a big common one, right? I'm texting or receiving texting, Snapchatting, whatever are you going to do, something that's not related to what you're there in the meeting for. And like I said last week, from a norms perspective, meeting norms, everyone's got to be on time for your meeting, and there's no devices. It's got to be something like that, where you don't have, you don't use your device unless you've been asked to. So don't sit there and check your phone in the middle of your meeting, right? That distracts, especially if someone, as an example, looks at it and says, why are you checking your phone? Or is this something relating to the meeting? No. It's kind of annoying. You know what I'm saying? If you're talking to somebody and they're always doing this, it's a negative, especially when it comes to build tracking, and especially when it comes to how we're doing. Tell me how we're doing. Someone's going to be reporting on the meeting. This is where the build is at. This is the deficiency. Here's where the testing is falling short. Someone just said today in the back, right? We were just talking about how your collisions weren't working, right? And was that kind of something that was itemized on the build? Was that a feature? You must have collisions to do a game, but was it something that was mentioned on your build tracker? Do you have a build tracker of some sort? Everything that you need to do for this build, do you have that written down somewhere, like a list of things you want to get done?
Yeah, we had that we have to, for the platform, everything, for how the player lands on each tile and stuff like this. But
is it a checklist? Like, what is it? How do you do it? How do you track your build? How do you track to see if you got all your features? But is it a check mark? Is it yeah, we're done? Is it did you cross it out? Like, yeah. So there's got to be some way of doing that. And I talked about last week and the week before and a couple other weeks before that GitHub it's got a good built-in tool. But that means you got to use GitHub or some kind of other tracking mechanism like Teamwork. Trello is another good project management tool. But something to track each of your features that you basically knocked off on this milestone for this build, as an example, right? We're also going to talk about something called build notes. And I talked about last week, maybe a couple weeks ago, about this idea of having a brain trust, right? And what a brain trust is: having a meeting that the minds come together and they take a look at your project or your product at this point in time. And one of the things that you want to try and do during that meeting is be as honest as possible with each other, and without trying to hold back too much. You're not going to try to hurt anybody, right? Because remember, this thing that you're building isn't you, right? It's not you. It's a product that you're making together, right? And you should be prepared to take some feedback, especially if you're the lead engineer, as an example. So if someone says an example, well, you know what, this game, I'm not really happy with this aspect of the game. This is something that we have to change. That should be something that you put down in your build notes, right, as you move forward when you have your meetings. So build notes are almost like a feedback mechanism for you. Things that are going well, things that are not going well. When you do your weekly meetings, you should have some kind of essence of that. Anything that's new in the build, or anything that's hasn't really shown up in the build because of time delays, or maybe something you're doing with research and development because you don't know how to do something. You're trying to do something you've never done before, right? Which also can cause you to have delays when it comes to your build schedule. And here it is, version control. I think it's kind of a key thing. The industry uses, a lot of times they use Perforce. If you're someone who works with Unity a lot, or even Unreal, a lot of times Perforce is something that we use in the industry a lot more than GitHub. But from a software engineering perspective, if we're just going back to software engineering per se, like I said, I use GitHub for everything. I use GitHub for every project that I ever work on. I always create either a public repository if I'm going to share with my friends, or I use a lot of private repositories, but I use version control for just about everything. And really, it kind of safeguards your build, right? If anything goes wrong, like I said, it's something that can keep you guys going. So we talked about how often you should be creating builds. One of the things that you almost see a lot of times, even with things like Google Chrome, right? You might see something like they have a nightly builds kind of deployment, right? And if you've ever heard, anyone not ever hear of nightly builds, what that means, right? Nightly builds is something that you might see. Sometimes it's automated, right? Where nightly builds are created automatically, kind of at the end of the day, that are kind of shared either on GitHub, and usually use things like Git hooks to do that, where you can hook into your code and produce it right on GitHub, or even display it if you're making a game for the web, and you guys are, then you can be displaying it directly onto some kind of staging area, not the actual website itself that's going to be displaying your final game product, but a staging area where your team or your depending on if you have clients, or if it's your marketing department or whatever, can take a look at any time. I also asked you last week when I met with you that I want you guys not just to stage this game, but to actually produce it live, right? Does anyone have any issues producing it live for the final release? Remember, I talked about GitHub Pages is one of the ways you can do that. You don't have to use GitHub Pages if you don't want. You can also use a cloud service like Microsoft Azure. As students, you do have access to using Azure for free, right? If you don't know how to do it, or if you need more information about that, I can certainly cover that with you guys, either one-on-one or in lecture. Okay, but when we produce daily builds, again, and by now, when I'm talking about the build schedule, by now you should be producing weekly builds, or at least a couple times a week. Is there anyone that's not producing a weekly build by this point? I'm talking, when I say build, I mean like a revision. That's good. I was looking for anybody. So if someone put up their hand, I'd be like, what? How are you not producing a weekly build, right? By now, you've got a very limited amount of time. Even though it seems that some of your projects may seem to be very small, right, in terms of their scope. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of little details that all of us have to take care of in terms of testing and in terms of all the features that we're asking for you to put in. So Q&A, quality assurance, all right, what's the role? Really, it's all around trying to give you guys feedback, right? And hopefully some of your team should have some Q&A lead, if you will. Does anyone not have a QA lead in your team? So what is a QA lead? So someone who just tests it, and that's their role, primary role. It could be a second hat that they're wearing. So maybe your primary role is, you're the leader of the team, right? Or maybe you're developing audio or other kinds of assets or getting assets. But then another hat you're wearing is, in this kind of environment, you're also a QA lead, someone who's going to be involved with testing, the products or the versions of each of your builds, right? So if you don't have that, that's something that you can add on. When I see your final presentations, I'm going to see something like, I should see someone that has the role of kind of QA lead or a tester or an analyst or something like that in there, right? And it's really, really important to have somebody that takes the reins on this, because if you just say, yeah, we're all going to test it, sometimes that gets really lost and there's no testing done before delivery day. And that's really, really bad, especially in small teams and independent companies. There's a lot of more informal things that go on. Well, we've played the game, so we've tested the game. No, no, no. Testing is a rigorous process where you sit there and say, for this particular build, what are the milestones? What are these features or things that we wanted to get out for this build? Let's do a check mark and let's test. What are our expectations for the test and what does it produce? I have to say, it's almost like I kind of go back to this whole test-driven development. Anyone ever heard of test-driven development? Did you guys talk about it at all in first semester at all? You guys talked about it? So test-driven development, one of the ways we can do that is this idea of red-green refactor. You ever heard that? Red-green refactor? So it's either a pass-fail kind of testing, right? Where we kind of look at something and go, for this particular module or method, we're going to do a pass-fail. Does it pass-fail, this feature for this milestone? If it's a pass, it's green. If it's a fail, it's red. And if it's a fail, what can we do to refactor it to make it work, right? Sometimes even if it passes, it may not really be what we're looking for a final product, and we still may need to refactor it or rebuild it in some way, right? So the QA lead, someone who's going to be taking on the role of quality assurance, and that's the responsibility, should be doing that red-green refactor or pass-fail kind of testing at the very least. The other thing we do with QA is we do A/B testing. Has everyone heard of A/B testing? Okay, A/B testing. So you have two versions of a particular page. An example of this would be the menu, right? I got my menu page, and you know what? I'm looking at the menu, and someone produces an idea of where he wants the buttons and so on, the user interface, and that's A. And then we refactor it, we do something else to it, we move things around, someone else, there's another idea for it, another concept, and we do B, and we kind of show A and B to different people, and we get votes on who, what you like more, right? And we're the biggest A/B testers, here, because we're technical people, most of us, right? And we go on the web a lot. And I'll tell you right now, it happens all the time where we get A/B tested all the time. Everything from the products you look at Amazon, if you're someone who shops on Amazon, or the sites that you search on Google, if you're a Google searcher, if you don't use DuckDuckGo or something like that, you get tested all the time. And whatever your responses are, which websites you go on and everything else, things get thrown at you. And a lot of times the buttons you click, especially in a commercial environment, are recorded rigorously. Everything you do, anything you touch is recorded, and you're involved in a lot of, believe it or not, A/B testing all the time. So that's part of QA. Now, one of the things they talk about here is that every 3 or 4 days during alpha, there's got to be testing. It's the frequency increases until your final build, and I agree with that. But one of the challenges we always have, especially in small groups like this, even if you have a group of 10, it's still relatively small, is the fact that you want to build, you want to get something out, you have some kind of thing that you want to get done, and so testing goes by the wayside, right? Testing is like the last thing that you want to do, but it should be incorporated to all of your builds. We talked about automated builds, as especially things like setting up nightly builds. Sometimes it's not possible in this small environment. Does anyone have anything automated right now? Well, one of the things you can automate, even in this level right now, is things like continuous deployment, right? So if you have, if you're using Microsoft Azure or some kind of other cloud service, or even any kind of service at all, you can do a continuous deployment from your GitHub repo or Bitbucket, if you're a Bitbucket person or whatever, directly to your website in this particular case. And it can be something that you automate. So every time you make a change to GitHub, bang, your website gets deployed again. And I can show you how to do that at another time. We talked a little bit about build notes, but they're really important. And passing those build notes and recording them in every meeting. I know some people, again, there's more of an informal sense when you meet someone, especially from a school perspective, you meet together, and there really isn't a lot of people don't have formal meetings. Does anyone have, how about I'll ask this question, anyone here have formal meetings when you get together? Like where you take notes, you have an agenda, you kind of meet the agenda, you guys are with the agenda, you kind of putting your hands up saying kind of, sort of?
It evolves from there.
It evolves.
The baseline is that.
Try and do it as an exercise. I'm telling you, I know some people may say like, well, we don't need to. We know each other so well. Especially maybe a team that really has good synergy and works well together. I don't need to be so formal, right? But I guarantee you, if you have someone that comes up with an agenda and says, here's the agenda today, these are the things we're going to be covering, and you might find that you're more productive. One of the items on the agenda should be something called build notes, where you kind of pass that detail that we talked about, that feedback, back to different departments. For example, let's have this note that goes back to our, so someone's going to take away a takeaway more than anything else is how I like to think about it, where you pass to the art department, the art lead, or the person who's taking care of your assets, they get a build note that says, you know what, we need to change this asset. This asset doesn't work for us, right? Or this sound is no good, right? Or you know what, this feature doesn't quite work the way we wanted it to. So the testing uncovered that this thing happened, and we're going to take that build note back. And then that build note's also recorded, right, as part of your weekly build, your weekly report, to kind of say, here's what didn't work, and this is what we did to change it. Now, again, going back to build notes and paperwork, you're going to say that, Tom, this is a lot of paperwork for us. We're a small team, and it's like another piece of overhead, something else we have to take care of, on top of actually producing something that's playable and that's fun, right? But again, the exercise here that we're doing here in game production 2 is not just about building your game. It's not just about doing this on your own, right? It's about working with other people and following a process that you can use in the industry, whether it's in the game industry as a developer or in some other industry from a transferable skills perspective. Because maybe you're going to be working in another industry, not the game industry, you're taking the course, but maybe, you might end up somewhere else. And the stuff we're talking about here is pertinent, especially when it comes to any other kind of project you're building, especially software projects. So the stuff that you're talking here in game production in the book, it's all comes from a base of, when we build things for software development, right? It's the same process. And it's a mishmash of that, I would say, as well as film production. Those kind of the two that kind of join together to produce, our most, the games that we see a lot. Again, we talked about different kinds of builds, and there's builds for the development team. There's builds for management. I'm just going to kind of go over this. When I go over it like this, guys, for your exam, that's exactly what I want you to remember, just the highlights. Builds for management, builds for marketing, and there's different builds because, again, are build notes, and these build notes are the kind of things that come back, from our weekly reviews, weekly meetings, right? So if I was going to give a build notes for management, sometimes what happens is they might want to know if there's a change made, why was it made? Why was the feature left out? Or why is it not going to be included? Maybe it can't be included. Maybe something we thought could be done easily can't be done within the time and resources that we have. I'm going to talk briefly about testing. So by now, again, you should be almost at your alpha release, which is perfect when we're talking about testing. So if you haven't implemented testing yet, and I'm talking thorough testing, you should be starting to think about how am I going to test regularly, for every single build that I make. Like I said, starting next week, we may, kind of engage in an exercise when you start testing, other people's products to help them along and give them some build notes, right? Pass on some build notes to them so that they can take it away and kind of make any changes that they, that are necessary. How about this? How about if you get a build note that's undoable, right? Like you get something that says you should really change the whole game. Like it might be something massive, like that changed the aspect of your game. Or they might give you a suggestion, something like, it would have been nice to see a game that does this. If it's something that's, something like that, you discard that, right? You can't make a massive change to your game. But if it's something specific, and this is the kind of way I want you guys to figure it out. When I give a feedback to somebody, I want to be as specific as possible and try and make it measurable, right? I was expecting, the score to show up every screen, right? But something that's very specific, right? But in the, when I went to the second level, the score, part of the user interface, didn't show up in the same place, or it was differently aligned, or it was a different size, or whatever. Maybe it was the wrong color, or maybe I couldn't see the score because of the background changes, that kind of stuff. I want you to be very specific. Don't just say something like, I don't like it, or I like it. Those two things, when I say I like it or I don't like it, it's absolutely useless. It's like James and I, we're going to go to a museum together, James, right? Or some kind of gallery. And we look at pictures on the wall, and James says, yeah, I like it. How do I know what that means, right? Maybe James and I are totally different people. I'm talking about from an art perspective now, right? But if it was something technical that James knew about, for example, if he said, I really don't like the artist's use of color here. I don't think it really captures it for me. I don't think I get any kind of emotion back from this painting. I'm using a painting as an example here, right? Something more concrete, a little bit more, even for the, less substantial stuff we can look at when we look at art, right? And part of the things we do here when we make games is there's artistic value to what we do, right? So we're going to look at a game and go, I like it. That's really useless. Say, you know what? The pace is good. It's challenging, right? That's a better response to on a build note than I like it. I like it means nothing, right? So be specific with your build notes so that way when it comes down to when you're going to get some of this when you do testing, because as you test, it's going to feed feedback. It's going to produce feedback for build notes. But one of the things you want to do, you want to test as early as possible because you want to find defects and bugs. So one of the rules for testers, and I'm asking you to do this, is try and break the other people's code. Like I'm not talking about like crash their system. I'm talking about like click every button that you can. Mash the keyboard controls, that kind of stuff as much as possible. It should stop. It should not crash the system. If you can mash a combination of keys and it crashes the computer or whatever, or it crashes the code, that's bad. There's something wrong with that build, right? The other one is, especially if you're building something with JavaScript, can I go into the command line on JavaScript inside the browser and give myself unlimited life, right? Can I do that? Something's wrong. I should not be allowed to do that when I go into the command line in JavaScript, okay? You guys should have your code encapsulated in some kind of IFI, an immediately invoked function expression, right? And if you don't have that, that's something we can test. We can go into that and say, can I search and see what the score is? Can I find what that is? Can I crash it? Is there a way I can do that? So try and find bugs. One of the things you want to try and do, especially when there's any input from the player, you want to do input validation as much as possible, whether it's through some kind of gamepad, a joystick, keyboard, mouse, whatever you're going to use, right? You want to do as much input validation as possible because humans have a great way of breaking stuff when they use it, right? Especially during testing or when they play the game in its entirety. One of the things I have to also say about testing is test every part of the bloody game, right? Don't leave it out. Don't just sit there and not do the menu. Oh yeah, here's the menu. No, go through the menu and see if you can go through it all. Make sure that it speaks to you. If you look at the menu and there's an instruction screen, and the instruction screen is a wall of text, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe the feedback that you should give is there's just too much text on the instruction screen, and it doesn't really do anything for me, right? Because I can't learn anything from the instructions. I'm too lazy to read the instructions. Put that in your build notes, right? Or maybe the other thing you're going to say is, when I go to my game over screen, I can't restart the game properly. Or when I press these combination of buttons, my game crashes. So we talked about QA testers. So from now on, what I want you to try and do is incorporate a testing schedule. I know maybe you haven't done it yet, right? And you guys are like, what else are we going to do? We're building this game, in production, and we have another thing, another piece of paperwork to keep track of. But yeah, you should have a testing schedule, even if it's once a week. For now, like where you get together and say, okay, we're going to test the game today. We're going to test it for like half an hour rigorously. We're going to give some feedback on what has to be done. The whole game, not just piece parts, not just one level. everything that's in your current build should be tested. We talked about this as play testing, and that's one way you can test it. Actually, by playing the game and seeing if it's fun. All right. So is it fun? It's not just does it meet requirements or does it check the functions are there. Functions might be there, but what if it's not fun? Right? That might be another piece of feedback you give back to your build. You know what? At this point, Tom, it's not challenging enough. That could be another thing. It's either it's too challenging or not challenging enough. Why is it not challenging enough? Because of these things, these factors. The AI isn't smart enough, or the game moves too fast, so that way it's too challenging, or it's too slow, in terms of the way it works, or it's too clunky, or you know what, I really don't like when I climb up this ladder because I get stuck every single time I go to this point, right? Something like that, concrete feedback that you want to get through playtesting. Again, from when it comes to business, we're going to talk about a demo that you're going to give off to, to marketing, and part of that is making sure that you test the demo build that you're going to give to marketing or to management or to anybody else for previewing, because it can be quite embarrassing when you get a piece of code to somebody that is just flawed and full of bugs. How about code release candidates? We're going to get on to the point where we get to this point where we're going to do our code release candidate, right? When it's after alpha, after beta, we're almost done. It's almost at the final release point. This is a critical time to really do, again, more thorough testing, making sure that all the features are in the build, and there's nothing that can't be that can be easily broken. How many of you guys or girls? Any girls here today? No girls today. How many guys in the room, play a game and it's buggy right now? Commercial AAA game right now, right? What games do you play that's buggy today? For Honor, right? What's that? Is that out yet? I can't believe it. Every game is buggy. Every game. How about anyone play Civilization 6? Anyone try that out, right? Some people say that game is broken, right? But it's not broken because of a feature issue, right? Some people say it's broken because of the tech tree, right? Like you can have like nuclear weapons without rocketry, right? That's another kind of weird thing, right? It's not just a technical issue when we do testing. It's also doesn't make sense when we put something out. Does it make sense that it's supposed to do this, but actually does something else, does it very well, but it's wrong, right? That's another thing when we test. But like you said, there's like every major game out there has some kind of bug. I remember in the old days how you could walk through walls. Can you still? Do you know any game that you can still walk through walls and go through the geometry at all? Right? Yeah. It's possible if you get a master key, you're in the right spot, you go through, right? It's funny how gamers can find this stuff, right? It's not like it was meant to ever be found, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to leave a hole here in the wall, and we're going to get people to come into this hole, right? And then be lost inside the geometry. Their level is going to be over. They can't save. Their character can't be. You can't do anything with the character, and they've just lost all their progress, right? No studio in the right mind would ever do that, right? Sometimes Easter eggs, that's a whole different thing. Easter eggs, hiding Easter eggs inside of your world, that's one thing. But making big holes in your world, never something that we've ever wanted to do. But yet, they've gone through this process, right? They've gone through code release. Is it ready? They've gone through final release. They've gone through alpha. They've gone through beta, or so you think. I think I've covered most of this stuff when it comes to testing. One thing I got to talk about is as we approach code freeze. So what do you do when it comes to testing after code freeze, that particular point in time, I think is a great place to really step it up, right? Make sure that everything is done, that you thoroughly test everything. I also should talk about releases, right? Again, from a scheduling perspective, and I want to just talk about this, I always talk about the schedule for us. And for people who are watching online and worry about the exam, that's normally scheduled for next week. That's when it would normally be out. Let's take a look at our schedule. So again, like we said, the first playable was done week 4. By week 9, which is actually week 8, officially week 7 was the midterm, and physical week 8, like calendar week 8, was our reading week, right? We're supposed to have our alpha build due on week 9. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to push things back a little bit, okay? I think what my thoughts are about this is that alpha release was due week 9, right? And I think I'm going to push it back to week 10. Okay, are you guys okay with that? So scheduling.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I don't want to do that because it's going to make crunch time for everything else, which means that when it comes to code freeze, normally it would be week 9. If this moves to week 10, code freeze must move to around week 12, right? So everything's going to kind of move up a week. Where it can't move up a week is beta. I can't really change our beta release time, right? So that's we can't move that around. But the other two, normally we have a couple weeks between each of the releases. But we're not going to do that when it comes to after beta.
So we got 2 weeks.
So example would be week 9, which is the week after reading week, right? We'll do our exam. Week 10 will be our alpha release, where you'll be required to do another presentation. Basically, you'll come together as a team again, and you'll present your product again to the class. Okay, so be prepared for that. That's week 10.
Week 9 is when we're gonna have our midterm now.
Week officially week 9 on the schedule.
Yeah.
Not next week. Next week it doesn't make any sense. We still have more stuff to talk about. I still want to do a review with you. I still want to work out some issues with some of the teams.
So we're gonna do it after each session.
Yes. And again, a lot of the other, I think, like I said, Alex is doing the same thing with his. Yeah.
Do we have a code freeze?
We're gonna have a code freeze, but we're just gonna push out one week. That's all I'm doing. So if you notice, code freeze is supposed to happen on week 11. It'll happen on week 12. Okay. So then the next time we're gonna have a presentation again. If you look at the schedule, is week 13, right? So week 13 we'll do another presentation, and that'll be your beta release, right? And then finally, a couple weeks after that, we'll do your final. And what I want to try and do for your final, if I can, is I want to try and get some. I want to get some guests from the game industry. I've got a couple people that I know that I want to kind of bring in, so they can look at your game. And I want you to get feedback on that day, right? If they can give you some kind of feedback, so we can go away with some kind of feeling about how you did. And if I can bring them in earlier, I will. Maybe instead of the final release, maybe for beta, because and if you can get some help from people beforehand, before your final release, that's probably a better idea. Okay, so we're still sticking with the schedule. The only thing we're changing is we're pushing things out a little bit. But we're definitely moving our midterm, not to next week, but to the week after our break. Okay. Any questions around the stuff we talked about today? We talked about builds. We talked about testing. And that's my timeout for this day. I'm going to go around now and talk to each of the teams. I want to find out what everyone's done. And again, for those people who are not producing or who have team members who are absent on a regular basis, who are not producing, we have to come up with a plan for what we're going to do with them. Okay? Otherwise, for those people watching remotely, we'll talk next week. Thank you.